smell. Not the smell of death, not yet. Something far more ordinary. The damp, stale air of a forgotten corridor. The lingering scent of boiled cabbage and cheap disinfectant. This is the scent of the Ruhr district in Duisburg, Germany. The year is 1976. The building is a drab concrete block, one of thousands just like it, a scar left over from a war that promised a new beginning but delivered for many a life of gray routine. In buildings like this, life is measured by the thinness of the walls. You hear your neighbors' arguments, their televisions, their children crying. You live stacked on top of one another, sharing pipes and problems. And on this particular day, the problem is plumbing. Imagine the plumber. He's probably had a long day. This is just another job, the last one before he can go home. The call was simple, a blocked toilet pipe, affecting the whole building. It's a common complaint, an annoyance. He arrives with his tools and his weariness, ready to battle a simple clog. He starts his work in the building's cellar, a damp and dark space where the guts of the building are exposed. He finds the main sewage pipe, a thick cast iron artery, and gets to work. He expects to find what he always finds: wet clumps of paper, maybe a child's lost toy, the usual debris of daily life. But this time, it's different. The blockage is stubborn, it's dense, it's organic. He works harder, his tools straining against the obstruction. Finally, with a sickening lurch, something gives way. A mess of pale, fibrous material spills out. He stares at it, confused. This isn't paper. It's not waste. It's tissue. Strands of what look like guts. Small, meticulously cut pieces of internal organs. He sees something that looks unnervingly like a piece of a human kidney. The smell hits him then. Not the smell of sewage, but the sweet, coppery scent of old blood. He stumbles back, his mind refusing to connect the dots. This is impossible. It's absurd. This is the kind of thing you see in nightmares, not in the cellar of a boring apartment block on a Tuesday afternoon. For a moment, he's frozen between two worlds, the world of routine clogs and the world of unspeakable horror. He makes a choice. He leaves his tools where they are, scrambles out of the cellar and finds a telephone. The police need to be called, right now. When the Kriminalpolizei arrive, they bring with them a professional skepticism. They've seen it all. They expect this to be a misunderstanding, a hysterical overreaction. But one look at the plumber's face and one look at the contents of that pipe, and they know. This is real. The work begins, it's methodical, it's procedural. They trace the plumbing floor by floor, a map leading them upwards closer to the source. The first floor is clear. The second. They move with a quiet tension, their footsteps echoing in the stairwell. The evidence is undeniable. Someone in this building is disposing of a human body, piece by piece, flushing it down the toilet as if it were common trash. The trail leads them to the top floor, to a single door. Apartment number 9. They stand before it, the worn paint, the simple brass number. Behind this door is the person they're looking for. And now, their minds begin to race. After 21 years of terror across the Ruhr Valley, of a phantom killer the papers called the Ruhr Cannibal, could this be it? They brace themselves. They expect to face a monster. A cunning, violent predator. A criminal mastermind who has outsmarted them for decades. They place their hands on their holsters. They are ready for a fight. One officer raises his hand. He knocks. The sound is loud in the silent hallway. They wait. They hear a faint shuffling from within, the soft click of a lock being turned. The door creaks open, and there he is. But it's not a monster. It's nothing. The man standing before them is in his mid-50s. He's paunchy, with soft, rounded shoulders. His hair is thinning. His eyes are placid, almost vacant. He looks less like a predator and more like a tired clerk. He seems confused by the presence of the police, but not scared. There is no menace here, no cunning. There is only a profound, unsettling emptiness. This is Joachim Kroll. The officers are momentarily stunned into silence. This cannot be the man. It's impossible. But then, an odor wafts from the apartment, the smell of something cooking on the stove, a rich, meaty stew. One officer peers past Kroll's shoulder into the small, tidy kitchen, and he sees it. In a pot, bubbling away on the stove amongst the potatoes and carrots, are small pieces of meat. But the shape is wrong. On one of the pieces you can still see the faint outline of a knuckle, a fingernail. He was cooking a stew made from the hand of a 4-year-old girl. The contrast is so horrifying, so fundamentally insane, that it barely registers. The monster they had hunted for 2 decades, the embodiment of evil that had haunted the dreams of a nation, was this quiet, simple man. A man who was, in that moment, calmly preparing his dinner. The camera would later linger on his face, a face devoid of malice, a face you would pass on the street and forget instantly. And in that moment, the entire German police force, the entire country, had to ask itself a single, soul-shattering question. This was the monster we were looking for. This is not the story of a criminal mastermind. This is not a tale of genius or charisma or grand evil designs. This is the story of how absolute horror can hide behind a mask of utter boredom. It's a story about the terrifying disconnect between appearance and reality, and the chilling truth that evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it just looks simple, and that is why the most dangerous monsters are the ones you are never, ever warned about. To understand how a monster can disappear for 21 years, you first have to understand the world that let him hide. Imagine West Germany in the 1950s. It's a nation haunted by ghosts, desperately trying to build a future on a foundation of rubble. The air is thick with the dust of reconstruction. The soundtrack of the country is the rhythmic clang of hammers on steel, the groan of cranes lifting concrete, the constant grinding noise of a society trying to forget. This was the era of the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. A time when the collective German soul wanted nothing more than to look forward, to work hard, to rebuild, to put food on the table, and to never, ever speak of the horrors of the past. The national motto, unspoken but understood, was simple. Keep your head down. Do your job. Don't cause trouble. Conformity wasn't just a social preference, it was a survival mechanism. To be different was to be suspicious. To be loud was to be a problem. The ideal citizen was quiet, productive, and predictable. Someone who blended into the great gray machinery of progress. This society, in its desperate quest for normalcy, created the perfect camouflage, a human-shaped blind spot. And into this world a boy named Joachim Kroll was born. A boy who would grow into a man so perfectly unremarkable, so utterly devoid of presence, that he was practically invisible. He wasn't just hiding in this world, he was a product of it. He was the human equivalent of wet concrete, gray, formless, and easily overlooked. He was everything that post-war Germany, in its own wounded way, was asking him to be. And for decades no one thought to look closer, because in a world trying to escape its monsters, no one ever suspected that a new one was quietly taking shape, right there in the open. Joachim Georg Kroll was born in 1933, the youngest of 9 children. His world was small and suffocating. His father was a coal miner in the industrial heart of Germany, a hard man forged by hard labor, who brought the dust of the earth home on his skin, and the exhaustion of the mines home in his soul. The family was poor, not just struggling but deeply, systemically poor. Hunger was a constant, dull ache. Life was a cramped, noisy affair, in a small apartment where privacy was a fantasy. From the very beginning, Joachim was different. He was the runt of the litter. Physically weak, and mentally, he was always a few steps behind everyone else. He was a late talker. He struggled with chronic bedwetting well into his adolescence, a source of deep shame and ridicule. At school, the other children saw him as an easy target. He was slow to learn, unable to grasp concepts that came easily to others. They called him a simpleton, a dunce. The teacher saw a boy with little potential, someone to be passed along through the system with a sigh and a shrug. His intelligence was later tested and found to be well below average, an IQ of just 76. But this wasn't the kind of low intelligence that made him helpless. It was a specific kind of simplicity. He could function. He could hold a menial job. He could follow basic instructions. What he lacked was the ability to understand the complex, unwritten rules of human society. Empathy, social cues, the subtle dance of human interaction. These were like a foreign language to him. So he built a life out of being underestimated. People didn't see him as a threat. They saw him as pitiable, harmless, the quiet, simple boy who wouldn't hurt a fly. This perception became his invisibility cloak. It was the single greatest weapon he would ever possess. Because while the world looked at him and saw nothing, something was beginning to stir deep inside him. A set of simple, powerful, and terrifyingly primal urges. He didn't have the intellectual capacity to suppress them, or the moral framework to understand why he should. He just knew what he wanted. His world was not one of complex thoughts or ambitions. It was a world of appetites. And soon, one of those appetites would turn monstrous. The date is February 8, 1955. The place is a small town near Ludinghausen. Joachim Kroll is now 22 years old. He's living the life everyone expected of him. A quiet, unremarkable existence, working a physically demanding but simple job at a local mine. He is, to the outside world, exactly what he appears to be. A simple man, living a simple life. On that day, a young woman named Irmgard Striel, just 19 years old, is walking home. She is a refugee, a life already marked by hardship and displacement, now trying to build something new in the recovering nation. She is vibrant. She is full of hope. She has a future. She never makes it home. What happened to Irmgard Striel is an act of shocking, almost animalistic brutality. Kroll, driven by an impulse he likely didn't even understand himself, stalks her. He attacks her. He strangles her to death. And then he mutilates her body in a way that suggests a mind completely detached from human norms. It is a crime of pure, predatory violence. There is no complex motive, no intricate plan. It is the simple, horrifying fulfillment of a desire. The police investigate. They are looking for a monster, a cunning and vicious killer. They question suspects. They follow leads. But they never once look at the quiet, simple-minded young man who works at the mine. Why would they? He doesn't fit the profile. He is harmless. He is nobody. And the next morning, as the search for Irmgard's killer begins, Joachim Kroll wakes up. He eats his breakfast. He puts on his work clothes. And he walks to the mine for his shift. He stands shoulder to shoulder with other men who are talking about the terrible news about the monster who walks among them. And he says nothing. He just does his job. The first murder had been committed. The first victim's life had been stolen. The monster had awoken, but the man simply went to work. After that first murder in 1955, a switch was flipped inside Joachim Kroll. An appetite once tasted now demanded to be fed. For the next 2 decades, the Ruhr Valley would become his private hunting ground. But his was not the hunt of a cunning, meticulous predator. There were no elaborate plans, no complex rituals. Kroll's evil was a thing of grim simplicity. It was opportunistic, it was impulsive, and it was woven seamlessly into the fabric of his crushingly dull life. His career followed a pattern, a rhythm, the rhythm of murder and mundanity. It's 1959. 4 years have passed since his first kill. The trail has gone cold. Kroll is now working as a toilet attendant at the Mannesmann factory, a job of quiet solitude and utter invisibility. He cleans the filth left by others, day in and day out. No one notices him. No one speaks to him unless they have to. He is a ghost, in blue overalls. One afternoon, he is walking home from his shift. The sun is setting. He sees a young woman, Clara Frieda Tesmer, just 24 years old. She is walking towards a park on her way to meet her fiancé. She is thinking of her future, of love, of a life just beginning. Kroll sees only an opportunity. He follows her into the park. She is never seen alive again. The next day, her body is discovered, brutally violated and murdered. And the day after that, Joachim Kroll puts on his overalls, clocks in at the factory and goes back to cleaning toilets. The rhythm continues. It's 1962. A 12-year-old girl named Petra Gysi is playing with friends. She's a child full of life and laughter. She wanders away from her group for just a moment. Kroll, now working at a different factory, is nearby. The impulse strikes. He lures her away. Her life is stolen in a moment of savage violence. Her murder sends a wave of panic through the region. Parents hold their children tighter. The police are stumped. They are looking for a monster. And the next day, Joachim Kroll is at work, sharing a cigarette with a co-worker, perhaps complaining about the weather, his face a mask of perfect, placid normalcy. He murdered 6-year-old Erika Schuletter, then reported for his shift at the Duisburg-Huckingen Steelworks. He murdered 20-year-old Barbara Bruder, then went home to his small, tidy apartment to watch television. He murdered 5-year-old Ilona Hark. And then, the next morning, he made himself breakfast. This was his life, a horrifying secret ledger where each entry of unthinkable violence was immediately followed by an entry of profound, soul-crushing banality. He wasn't living a double life. That would imply a level of complexity he simply didn't possess. Instead, for Joachim Kroll, murder was just another part of his routine, an errand to be run, an appetite to be satisfied. And as the years rolled on, and the body count grew, the police were no closer to catching him, because they were hunting for a phantom, a ghost, and they never thought to look at the man who was standing right there, in plain sight the entire time. With each new body, the pressure on the West German police grew. The public was terrified. The newspapers printed screaming headlines, giving the killer a name that dripped with Gothic horror. Der Menschenfresser von Duisburg, the Duisburg man-crusher. They painted a portrait of a diabolical genius, a German Jack the Ripper, a cunning phantom who moved through the night, leaving terror in his wake. And the police, they believed it. Their entire investigation was built on a single flawed assumption that they were hunting a brilliant, elusive monster. Their psychological profiles, their investigative strategies, all of it was geared towards catching a man who was Kroll's polar opposite. They were looking for a lion, a charismatic, powerful predator who was outsmarting them at every turn. And so they started seeing lions everywhere. Their desperation led them to a series of catastrophic mistakes. They needed a suspect who fit their narrative, and they found them. They arrested a local man named Heinrich Ott. He was a loner, a bit strange, and he fit their idea of what a killer should be. They interrogated him relentlessly. The pressure was immense. Heinrich Ott, unable to bear the weight of an accusation for a crime he didn't commit, took his own life in his police cell. He was an innocent man. They arrested another, Vincenz Queen. Again, he fit the part, he looked the part, but he was innocent. They arrested others, a man named Adolf Schickel, a man named Peter Shea. Their lives were ruined. Their names were dragged through the mud. They were victims not just of a flawed investigation, but of a profound failure of imagination. Think about it. The police were so convinced they were hunting a lion, they never once stopped to consider that the killer might be a different kind of animal altogether. They never thought to look for the crocodile, the creature that looks like a harmless log, floating quietly in the water, waiting patiently for its prey to come within reach. Joachim Kroll was that crocodile. He didn't need to be smart. He didn't need to be cunning. All he needed was for everyone to keep looking in the wrong direction. And for 21 years they did. They looked for the phantom, the mastermind, the monster from the headlines. They never looked for the simple man who cleaned the toilets, the quiet neighbor, the harmless simpleton. He was hiding in the one place they never thought to search, plain sight. For years, Kroll's crimes had followed a horrifying but consistent pattern: murder, rape, mutilation. But deep into his career of terror, something shifted. A new appetite emerged, an urge that would forever cement his place in the annals of criminal depravity. He began to cannibalize his victims. This wasn't a sudden, frenzied act. It was a deliberate, calculated decision. After a murder, he would dismember the body with a chilling, workmanlike precision. He would then carve off specific pieces of flesh, thighs, buttocks, parts of the back. He would wrap these pieces of his victims, take them home to his small apartment, and store them in his freezer. And over the next few days, he would cook them. He would fry them or boil them, sometimes adding them to a stew, just as he was doing the day he was finally caught. This is the ultimate taboo, the final line of human morality, crossed without a flicker of hesitation. When we think of cannibalism, we think of deranged rituals, of a lust for power, of a desire to consume the very essence of another human being. It is an act so monstrous it seems to defy rational explanation. But when the police finally asked Joachim Kroll the question that everyone was desperate to know, why? Why did you do it? His answer was so simple, so mundane, so utterly devoid of grand evil philosophy, that it was, in its own way, the most terrifying thing about him. He told them he did it to save money on groceries. Let that sink in. To Joachim Kroll, a man who earned a meager wage his entire life, human flesh was a practical resource. He was poor, meat was expensive. In his twisted, simple mind, cannibalism wasn't a ceremony of evil. It wasn't a quest for dark power. It was a twisted form of frugality. It was budgeting, an act of mundane practicality. This is the true, soul-crushing horror of the man. His appetites were not just for violence. They were, in the end, for the ordinary. The tragedy is that he saw no difference between buying a pork chop from the butcher and carving one from a human being he had just murdered. In his world, there was no moral line to cross. There was only the simple, chilling logic of an empty stomach and a full freezer. This was the monster they had been hunting, a man for whom the ultimate horror was just another way to make ends meet. After 21 years, Joachim Kroll was more than just a killer. He was a force of nature. A ghost story told to frighten children, a headline that sold newspapers, a constant, nagging fear in the back of the public's mind. He had gotten away with it for so long that he must have felt invincible, untouchable. The rules of society of cause and effect simply didn't seem to apply to him. But the universe, in its own slow and methodical way, has a habit of balancing the books. And for Kroll, the final accounting was about to begin. The year is 1976. The day is July 3rd. A family, the Ketters, are visiting relatives in Kroll's drab apartment building in the Lahr district of Duisburg. With them is their daughter, a little girl named Marion. She is 4 years old, a child at that magical age where the world is a playground, full of wonder and without fear. She is playing outside the building with other children, her laughter echoing in the concrete courtyard. It is a scene of perfect, ordinary childhood innocence, and Joachim Kroll is watching. We don't know what went through his mind in that moment. Perhaps it was the same cold, predatory impulse that had driven him for 2 decades. Perhaps after years of killing, it was simply habit. What we do know is that he saw an opportunity. He saw a small, trusting child, momentarily unsupervised, and his appetite, that monstrous, mundane appetite, stirred once again. He lured her away. He took her up to his apartment, that small, tidy space that served as both his home and his abattoir. And there, he committed his final, unforgivable act. He ended the life of a 4-year-old girl, an act so cruel, so pointless, so profoundly evil, it is almost impossible to comprehend. He murdered Marion Ketter. This was not the work of a criminal mastermind executing a flawless plan. It was clumsy. It was reckless. After decades of evading capture, Kroll was getting sloppy. The arrogance of invincibility had made him careless. He had a body in his apartment, a child from a visiting family whose absence would be noticed immediately. He needed to dispose of the evidence, and he needed to do it quickly. So he did what he had done before. He took out his knives, and he began the grim, workmanlike task of dismembering her small body. He was a creature of habit, falling back on the one method he knew. But this time, his routine would betray him. This time, his mundane solution would lead to his mundane downfall. For 21 years, the greatest minds in German law enforcement had tried to stop him. They had deployed detectives, profilers, and forensic experts. They had chased phantom leads, interrogated innocent men, and filled thousands of pages of case files. The entire machinery of the state had been geared towards finding this one man, and for 21 years it had failed, utterly. Joachim Kroll wasn't brought down by a brilliant detective who finally pieced together the clues. He wasn't caught in a dramatic, high-stakes police chase. He wasn't betrayed by an accomplice. The end of his reign of terror, the capture of Germany's most prolific serial killer, was not the climax of a grand police procedural. It was the result of bad plumbing. Think about the sheer humiliating absurdity of it. Kroll, in his haste to get rid of Marion Ketter's remains, did something he had never done before on this scale. He tried to flush the evidence. He cut her body into small, manageable pieces and began feeding them into his apartment's toilet. Guts, tissues, pieces of internal organs. He was treating the municipal sewer system like his own personal garbage disposal. But old buildings have old pipes. They are narrow, they are fragile, they are not designed to handle the evidence of a murder. The pipes clogged, badly. The water backed up, not just in his apartment, but throughout the entire building. It was a simple, domestic, infuriating problem. A backed-up toilet. A problem that would finally, after 2 decades of horror, bring the monster to light. The neighbor's complaint. The plumber's gruesome discovery. The police tracing the source, floor by floor. It all led back to that one inevitable conclusion. The man in apartment number 9. This is the punchline to a 2-decade-long joke of cosmic horror. The monster who terrified a nation was finally defeated by the most mundane problem imaginable. His secret life of murder and cannibalism, a life he had so carefully hidden behind a mask of utter boredom, was brought crashing down by a household nuisance. The great phantom of the Ruhr Valley, the man who had seemed like a ghost, was, in the end, just another tenant with a plumbing issue. He had gotten away with murder, but he couldn't get away with bad plumbing. When the police entered his apartment and saw the human hand boiling in the pot, the game was over. There was no struggle, no denial, no attempt to escape. The mask of the quiet, harmless man simply fell away, and underneath, there was nothing. Just a quiet, simple man who had been caught. They took him to the station, and he began to talk. And his confession was, in many ways, more chilling than the crimes themselves. There was no gloating, no pride, no remorse. He wasn't a Hannibal Lecter, toying with the detectives, reveling in his own dark genius. He was a clerk, reciting an inventory. He spoke of his victims in a flat, emotionless monotone. He recalled dates, locations, and methods with a placid, detached clarity, as if he were listing items from a grocery receipt. He talked about murder as if it were a chore. He talked about rape as if it were a minor transgression. He talked about cannibalism as if it were a practical, everyday decision. The detectives listening to him were stunned into silence. They were in the presence of a man for whom the most profound acts of evil were just things that happened. There was no great, dark philosophy. There was no complex psychological motive. There was only a void, a complete and utter absence of empathy. And then came the moment that would forever define him. In the middle of this horrifying confession, as he was calmly detailing 2 decades of unspeakable violence, Joachim Kroll paused. He looked at the interrogating officer, and he asked a question so mundane, so out of place, so perfectly illustrative of the man he was, that it has become legendary. He asked if he could have a cheese sandwich. His stomach was rumbling. He was hungry. In the middle of recounting his life as a cannibalistic serial killer, his mind was on his next meal. His appetite, even then, in that moment of final reckoning, was utterly, terrifyingly mundane. The trial of Joachim Kroll was meant to be a moment of national catharsis, a final public reckoning. The media descended on the Duisburg courthouse in a frenzy. This was their chance, the country's chance, to finally stare into the face of the monster that had haunted them for 2 decades. The public imagined a figure of pure menace walking into that courtroom. A charismatic devil, a cold-blooded genius, a snarling beast. They were ready for the villain of a horror movie. What they got was an anticlimax. When Joachim Kroll was led into the courtroom, a wave of baffled silence fell over the gallery. This was him. This was the Ruhr Cannibal. The man who stood before them was not a monster. He was a schlubby, middle-aged man in an ill-fitting suit, blinking in the glare of the lights. He looked less like a diabolical mastermind and more like a bewildered bureaucrat who had wandered into the wrong room. Throughout the proceedings, he just sat there, a portrait of profound disconnection. The prosecution laid out the horrifying evidence, piece by gruesome piece. They presented photographs, forensic reports, the stories of his victims. They detailed acts of murder, of rape, of torture, of cannibalism. The courtroom listened in stunned, horrified silence. The nation watched, transfixed by the sheer scale of his depravity. And Joachim Kroll? He looked bored. He would yawn. He would stare blankly at the ceiling. At times, he seemed to be on the verge of falling asleep. He showed no remorse, no fear, no anger, no emotion at all. It was as if the entire trial, this grand legal drama revolving entirely around him, had nothing to do with him. The words, the evidence, the pain in the room, it all seemed to wash over him, leaving no mark. He was a black hole of human emotion. The court did its duty. The evidence was overwhelming. He was found guilty and sentenced to 9 life terms, one for each of the murders they could definitively prove. Justice, in the legal sense, was served. The beast was caged. But for everyone who witnessed it, the trial left a deeply unsettling feeling. There was no victory here, no satisfying moment of closure. They had convicted the man, but the monster remained a mystery, because the man in the courtroom offered no answers. He had no grand philosophy of evil, no tragic backstory to explain his actions. He had nothing. The trial answered the question of what he did, but the far more terrifying question, why, was met with a dull, vacant stare. The truth was, there was no complex answer, and that was perhaps the most horrifying revelation of all. So what is the legacy of Joachim Kroll? What is the final lesson to be learned from his 2 decades of terror and his crushingly mundane life? It is this: we have been lied to about the nature of monsters. Our books, our films, our nightmares, they have all taught us what to look for. Evil, we are told, is charismatic. It is brilliant. It is a Hannibal Lecter, a Moriarty, a supervillain with a grand, twisted vision. We are taught to fear the shadows, to be wary of the charming stranger, to look for the signs of a cunning and malevolent intelligence. Joachim Kroll is the terrifying proof that this is a comforting fiction. The real horror of his story is not what he did, but who he was. He was nobody, a man of low intelligence, no ambition, and a personality so bland he was practically invisible. He was not a monster who hid among us. He was a monster that we, as a society, simply failed to see because our definition of monster was wrong. His story is a chilling reminder that the capacity for profound, unspeakable evil does not require genius. It does not require a master plan. It does not require a tragic, complex motive. The machinery of evil, it turns out, is terrifyingly simple. It requires only 2 things to function: opportunity and a complete and total absence of empathy. Kroll had both in abundance. He saw opportunities everywhere, in every lonely street and every trusting child. And he was a man born without the wiring for empathy, a void where a soul should have been. So the final warning of this story is not to look for the devil in the details. It is to understand the devil in the mundane. The real threat is not the monster in the shadows you've been warned about your entire life. It is the emptiness that can exist behind a pair of ordinary eyes. It's the quiet neighbor, the harmless coworker, the forgotten man, the person you see every single day and don't see at all. The real threat is not the monster in the shadows you've been warned about your entire life. It is the emptiness that can exist behind a pair of ordinary eyes. It's the quiet neighbor, the harmless coworker, the forgotten man, the person you see every single day and don't see at all. The methods of hiding are endless, and the masks evil wears are infinite. Join us for our next investigation as we explore another case where the monster was the person no one ever saw coming.